B had spent years on a ranch that creaked louder than any conversation he had in months. The long stretch of Montana plain was a second home to him, maybe even the only one. The whistle of the wind was his music, the smell of dust and leather his perfume. At 44, his life was measured not in birthdays, but in fence lines and changing seasons. The brim of his worn cowboy hat cast a permanent shadow over his features. He was polite, quiet, the kind of man who greeted people without ever inviting them in. Solitude had become a habit that fit him like an old jacket, worn but familiar. The morning sun rose slow and pale across the open land. B pulled his pickup into the general store near Livingston, his eyes heavy from an early start. He moved with the slow rhythm of someone who had repeated the same motions for years. He filled a gas can, wiped his hands on a rag, and stretched his back. Then he saw another truck pulling in beside his, gleaming under a thin layer of dust. William stepped out of it, younger, maybe early 30s, built strong with dark hair tied back carelessly. His forearm carried a trail of ink that disappeared beneath his sleeve. There was something guarded in the way he moved, but his eyes contradicted it. They were steady, bright, alive. He caught Reese's glance through the windshield just for a second and smiled, brief and teasing. B hesitated, unsure whether to look away or not. He ended up doing both. An awkward half-smile, a reflex more than choice. It should have ended there, two men getting supplies and moving on, but something lingered. They met again 2 days later at a small diner outside town. B was halfway through his coffee when William walked in, the doorbell chiming softly. The younger man took a seat across the aisle, close enough for their reflections to overlap in the window glass. Their eyes met again, fleeting but charged with something unspoken. Reese looked down at his plate, tried to focus on his food. Yet he could feel the weight of that gaze, warm and unsettling. After that, it kept happening. A glance at the feed store, a wave from across a pasture, headlights flashing in recognition on a dark country road. No words were exchanged. Not yet, just the silent rhythm of coincidence that felt less and less like chance. B found himself searching for that familiar blue truck along the back roads, though he would never admit it. The routine of the ranch felt lighter. When Mateo appeared somewhere on it, once stopped at a crossroads, B glanced over and William leaned out his window, holding up 2 coffee cups as if offering one across the space between them. Reese laughed for the first time in weeks. He shook his head, amused, and William raised his cup in salute before driving on. That night, B sat on his porch, his dinner a sandwich eaten in silence. He listened to the vast quiet of the plains. He wondered why a stranger's grin could echo louder than a coyote's howl. He brushed it off, but the thought stayed. Days passed. The same landscape stretched endless and dry, scattered with cattle guards and long shadows. B grew used to solitude again, but something in it had changed shape. He noticed more the glow of the sunset on his side mirror, the smell of rain far ahead, the way distant lights blurred into stars. The land no longer felt entirely his. One afternoon he stopped at the diner again. The place smelled like coffee and frying oil, walls covered with faded photos of local families. He took a booth near the back facing the window. When William walked in, B almost smiled before realizing he was doing it. William spotted him, immediately hesitated for a heartbeat, then chose the booth opposite. Neither spoke at first. The waitress came, took their orders separately. Reese sipped his coffee, pretending to read a menu he already knew by heart. He felt William's presence across the room like static in the air. Finally, William looked up, meeting his eyes again. This time there was no teasing, only recognition. B's breath caught slightly, not from nerves, but from something harder to name. William gave a small nod, subtle but sure, the kind of gesture that meant, "I see you," B nodded back. A quiet exchange, yet it felt like crossing a line invisible to everyone else. The meal ended and William left first. B watched through the window as the younger man walked to his truck. The sky outside was streaked with orange, the sun. Low over the horizon, William glanced back once before climbing in. It wasn't a smile this time, just a look that seemed to hold a question neither of them dared to ask. That night, B couldn't sleep. He lay in his small cabin, listening to the wind brush against the wooden frame. The world outside was vast and indifferent, but somewhere out there, another engine was humming the same lonely tune. He thought about the land and how it always held him without ever asking where he wanted to go. For years that had been enough. Now, for reasons he couldn't explain, it wasn't. He remembered William's eyes, how they had looked at him like they were searching for something familiar. Maybe both of them were. In the morning, Reese woke before dawn. The diner lights were still off, the sky a dull gray before sunrise. He started his truck, the vibration steady under his hands. He drove east toward the empty stretch where the plains began to rise into rocky foothills. The road curved ahead, silent, endless. He saw a line of trucks in the distance, and one of them, he could tell from afar, was blue. A strange calm filled him, the kind that comes when silence stops being loneliness and becomes anticipation. He didn't know what he was expecting, maybe nothing at all. But for the first time in years, the land didn't feel empty, felt alive. When he passed the blue truck, William glanced over and smiled again. Not teasing this time, not cautious, just real. B smiled back. Quiet acknowledgement of something that didn't have a name yet. The road stretched out like a promise neither of them had spoken, the kind of promise that only existed between strangers who kept finding each other in the same places. Reese drove on, the sky brightening behind him, the miles slipping away beneath his wheels. For once he didn't count them, he just drove with a faint, unfamiliar warmth in his chest and the echo of a smile that refused to fade. The blizzard never came that night, but something else did. The radio chatter spread the news first. Sudden, brutal snowstorm blowing in from the north, forcing everyone to hunker down. The county roads, usually humming with motion, went still under a deepening blanket of white. Ranchers scrambled to get their livestock to shelter, pulling pickups off onto whatever solid ground they could find. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and engine oil, a strange kind of peace after too many restless nights on the move. B had just finished securing his own cabin when he saw headlights cutting through the swirling snow. It was William's truck, stuck in a drift not far from his property line. The dashboard light glowed soft against his face, outlining the quiet worry he carried. Reese pulled on his coat and walked out. Leaning into the wind, he saw him again. William sat in his truck, trying the ignition one last time before giving up with a frustrated sigh. The yellow light from Reese's porch washed half of his face in gold and left the other in shadow. His shirt clung to his chest, damp with sweat from the effort that lingered even as the cold set in. He was watching the snow pile up against his windshield like a restless tide. B hesitated, not sure why. His steps carried him closer. When he reached the truck, he tapped on the window. William rolled it down, letting a flurry of snow inside. "Looks like you're not going anywhere," B said, his voice nearly lost in the wind. "Mind if I get an invitation into your cabin?" William asked, a half smile playing on his lips. Despite the situation, Reese nodded. "Get what you need. You're staying with me till this passes." His voice came out lower than he expected. William didn't answer immediately. He just nodded, his eyes holding Reese's. A few minutes later, they were inside, the storm raging outside the sturdy log walls. "Long night," William said finally, his tone calm but edged with something else. B nodded, stoking the fire in the hearth, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. They sat in silence for a while. Around them, the wind howled, rattling the window panes. B found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. William found a bottle of whiskey and poured 2 glasses. "Cheers," he said softly. Reese took one, their fingers brushing. "To what?" he asked. William's eyes held his for a second, too. Being stuck, he said, half smiling. They laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that starts small and stays near the chest. Conversation came easier after that. They talked about the endless work, about broken-down equipment, about the feeling of being halfway between somewhere and nowhere. B told him about the small town he grew up in, how he left because he couldn't breathe there anymore. William spoke of M. Terry, of the nights his mother used to sing while cooking, of how he hadn't gone home in years. The night deepened and the air turned cooler. Someone on the radio nearby shouted, "Looks like we're here till morning." Nobody complained. The sky above was a churning gray. Hidden from view, William leaned back against the couch, his gaze fixed on the fire. "You got anyone waiting on you?" he asked. B shook his head. "Not really." William tilted his head. "Not really or not at all." B let out a breath, almost a laugh. "Not at all." "Good," William murmured as if to himself. The word lingered in the air longer than it should have. A gust of wind slammed against the cabin, rattling a loose shutter. B stood to check it, but William was faster. He moved toward the window, his body passing close enough that B caught the scent of smoke and sweat, and something faintly sweet like worn leather warmed by the fire. When he straightened, they were standing close, too close. William's eyes flicked down, then up again. "You ever notice," he said quietly, "how people look different when they don't talk?" B blinked, unsure what to say. His throat felt dry. William smiled faintly. "You look like someone trying not to be seen." B opened his mouth to reply, but the words wouldn't come. The only sound was the soft crackle of fire and the rhythmic howl of the wind. William's hand lifted, almost without thought, brushing the collar of Reese's shirt. A gentle tug that said more than words could. Kiss happened before either of them decided it would. Quick, rough, unexpected. The taste of whiskey and smoke mixed between them. The scrape of stubble against skin. The press of breath that came too fast for an instant. The world shrank to the space between their mouths, the sound of their hearts beating out of sync. Then it ended. They parted as suddenly as they had met. Reese took a step back, his chest rising fast, his eyes searching for something solid. William stood still. His lips parted, a faint tremor in his jaw. The silence that followed was heavy, almost unbearable. B finally said, "We better get some rest." His voice was William gave a slow nod. He didn't smile this time. "Yeah," he said, barely audible, then after a pause softer, "This place won't feel the same now." B didn't answer. He walked to the other side of the room, each step slower than the one before. Inside the small spare room, he sat still for a long time, staring at the wall, at his own hands resting uselessly on his knees. The faint taste of the kiss lingered, a ghost he couldn't swallow away. Outside, the night continued as if nothing had changed. The wind kept howling, the fire kept burning, the snow kept falling with its cold indifference. But for B, something had tilted off balance. The quiet that once comforted him now felt restless. He tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw William's face lit by firelight, the curve of his mouth, the look in his eyes right before the world fell away. He turned over again and again, caught between guilt and an ache that didn't have a name. When dawn finally came, the storm had broken, leaving the world silent and white. B started making coffee, but his hands hesitated on the pot. He looked through the window and saw William walking toward his own truck, now free from the drift. Shoulders tense, head low. The younger man didn't look back, but something in the way he moved made B want to reach out to say something that might make sense of what had happened. He didn't. He just watched. The road opened before him like it always did, endless and indifferent, but the rhythm felt different. The quiet of the plains, once steady and grounding, now carried a tremor. He turned on the radio to fill the emptiness, but every song sounded like static. At a crossroads miles later, he stopped to clear some snow from his windshield. The sun was sharp, cutting through the cold air. He rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the fog that clung to him. In the distance, he saw a blue truck pulling out onto the main road, the same one that had been parked outside his cabin the night before. For a moment he thought about honking, about flashing his lights. Anything to bridge the gap, but he didn't move. He just watched as the blue truck merged onto the road and disappeared into the bright glare. The silence in his own truck grew thick again. He took a long sip of coffee, bitter and too hot, then set the cup down. The words from last night echoed faintly. This place won't feel the same. Now he knew William was right. Every stretch of pasture would now carry the memory of that touch, that look, that moment when two lives collided in the stillness of a storm-swept cabin. And as B drove on, the cold wind swept past his window, carrying the faintest trace of smoke and salt and something that felt almost like longing. He didn't look back, but for the first time in years, he didn't know where forward was supposed to lead. Morning light spilled over the parking lot of the feed store when B saw William again. The younger man was standing beside his truck, his phone pressed to his ear, his expression sharp with worry. The easy calm from the night of the storm had vanished. His shoulders were tense, his jaw locked. His voice low but hurried. Reese stayed near the pumps, not wanting to intrude. Yet something about the look on William's face pulled him closer. He caught a few words, enough to understand. Someone had been taken to the hospital. William ended the call and exhaled, rubbing his forehead as if to clear his thoughts. B took a cautious step forward. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly. William looked up startled, then shook his head. "It's my mom, she's in Cheyenne. They said her heart's acting up again." His voice cracked slightly at the end. "B didn't think you should go," he said. "Forget the work. I'll call the foreman, tell him what happened." William hesitated, but B had already pulled out his phone. Years of practical work made him sound steady, efficient, like he was solving a small problem instead of watching someone's world tilt. By noon, William was on the road heading south. B followed part of the way, not because he had to, but because leaving felt wrong. When William stopped outside the hospital, B parked a few spaces away and waited. He didn't plan to go in. He told himself he was only there to make sure the man got in safely. Hours passed. The sun sank lower, painting the sky with streaks of red. Finally, William stepped outside. His face was drawn, exhausted. He saw Reese sitting on the curb with 2 cups of coffee. The sight seemed to surprise him. "You waited?" William asked. Reese shrugged, didn't have anywhere else to be. They sat together on the hospital steps. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and blooming desert plants. Reese handed over one of the coffees. William took it, staring at the rising steam as if trying to find something in it. "She's stable," he said softly, "but they want to keep her for a few days." "Good," B replied. The word came out rough, but it carried more meaning than it should have. Inside the hospital room, Isabel lay resting, her breathing steady. She was smaller than B expected, her hair streaked with gray, her skin delicate as paper. When she opened her eyes, they were alert, curious. William spoke to her in English, his words quick and tender. Then he gestured toward B, who lingered by the door. "This is Reese," William said. "He helped me get here." Isabel smiled faintly. "Thank you, Mr. Quiet One," she whispered. The nickname made William chuckle, and even B couldn't help a small grin. After visiting hours ended, B drove Mateo home. The small house on the outskirts of town looked lived in, but weary, the paint peeling near the porch, wind chimes tangled from old storms. B offered to fix the porch light just to have something to do. William didn't refuse. The next day, B returned. He replaced the light bulb, then helped with the railing, then checked the water heater without being asked. It became a quiet routine. When Isabel came home, she found him in the kitchen tightening a pipe under the sink. She smiled, not surprised. "You fix everything?" she asked. Rehe almost said no, but Isabel waved him closer. "Sit," she said. "Coffee?" He nodded. Awkward but grateful, she poured 2 cups, one for him, one for herself. The house smelled like cinnamon and soap. She studied him while stirring sugar into her cup. "My son," she began, "he doesn't bring people here." Bee froze slightly. "I didn't mean to intrude," she smiled again. "Gentle but sharp, I didn't say you did." She leaned back in her chair. "He's different when you're around. Softer. He used to laugh like that when he was a boy." Reese looked down, unsure how to respond. "He's a good man," he said finally. "I know," she replied, "but good men get tired too." From the hallway came the faint sound of William's guitar. The melody was hesitant, like fingers searching for an old song. Reese listened, then looked toward the sound. Isabel followed his gaze and smiled. "You should stay for dinner," she said. "He cooks better when someone's watching." Dinner was simple, rice and beans and grilled chicken, but it felt warm, grounding. They ate on the porch while the air cooled and the first stars appeared. William told stories about his childhood, about his mother's stubbornness, about how she once threw a broom at a snake that slithered into their kitchen. Isabel laughed until she coughed and Bee instinctively reached for her water glass. She waved him off with a grin. When the plates were cleared, the 3 of them sat in comfortable silence. The hum of distant traffic mixed with the chirp of insects. Isabel looked at the 2 men, her gaze soft but knowing. "My son," she said to William, "sometimes God doesn't send someone to save you. He sends them to give you air." William glanced at Bee, then looked away quickly. "She likes to talk like that," he muttered, embarrassed. Bee smiled. "She's not wrong." Later that night, Bee offered to leave. He didn't want to overstay, but William stopped him at the door. "You don't have to drive tonight," he said. "There's a couch." Bee hesitated, then nodded. He lay awake, listening to the faint creak of the ceiling fan, the murmur of English from the next room, the soft rhythm of a life he hadn't known he missed. The following days blended into a pattern. Bee ran small errands, fixed what needed fixing, drove Isabel to appointments when William had shifts. He didn't say much, but his presence filled the house with quiet steadiness. Isabel began to trust him. She started calling him her silent rancher and would sometimes pat his arm when he passed by. One afternoon, while William drove his mother to a follow-up visit, Isabel spoke again, her tone gentle but deliberate. "He worries too much," she said. "He carries everything inside." "I noticed," Bee admitted. "You do the same," she said. 2 closed boxes trying to listen to each other. Bee looked at her, unsure what to say. She smiled, that same patient, mischievous smile that only mothers have. "You can't keep quiet forever, Mr. Quiet One," she said. When they returned, William seemed lighter. The doctor had given good news, and Isabel's energy returned enough for her to tease them both about how slowly they moved. She insisted they stay for dinner again. That evening, the sky turned violet and a breeze carried the scent of rain. The 3 of them sat outside. Bee was about to leave when William's voice stopped him. "If there's one thing real in my life," he said quietly, "it's that night." The words caught Bee off guard. He turned to look at him. William's eyes were steady, unflinching. "You don't have to say anything," he added. "I just wanted you to." No, Reese didn't speak. Instead, he reached out, his hand brushing against William's. It was a small gesture, clumsy, hesitant, but real. For a moment, neither moved. The air between them seemed to hold its breath. When he finally left that night, Isabel watched from the porch, her eyes soft with understanding. She whispered something that Bee didn't fully catch, but the tone was a blessing more than words. Driving away, he realized that for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man passing through. Road behind him wasn't just distance anymore. It was beginning to look like a path towards something that might last. The days following Isabel's recovery unfolded quietly, like pages turning in a book that no one dared to close. Bee kept coming by, sometimes to fix something small, sometimes just to sit with her on the porch while William ran errands. The conversations were simple, weather, roads, memories. But under them, an unspoken current kept pulling and twisting between him and Mateo. It was calm on the surface, yet restless. Beneath, one morning B woke early and drove to town for a supply run. The sun rose behind him, staining the prairie gold. He stopped at a familiar diner, where ranchers usually gathered before long days. As he sat at the counter with his coffee, he saw William walk in for a heartbeat. Relief flickered through him, but Mateo wasn't alone. He joined a few other ranch hands at the next booth, laughing easily, shoulders relaxed. B's chest tightened. He turned his eyes back to the coffee, stirring it though it no longer needed sugar. A few minutes later, William looked up and caught his gaze. The smile faltered. He hesitated, then nodded politely, just a small acknowledgement. B raised his cup in return, but the warmth between them vanished like steam in the morning air. When William checked his phone later, Reese's number lit the screen with a message. "You heading east today?" William typed a reply, but stopped halfway. At that exact moment, he glanced up again and saw Reese delete the text thread before slipping the phone into his pocket. Something in William's expression shifted. Hurt first, then anger, then the kind of tired acceptance that comes from expecting too much. He stood, dropped money on the table, and walked out without a word. That night, B sat in his truck, guilt sitting heavy in his gut. He told himself it was for the best. The land didn't forgive softness. The people he worked with wouldn't understand. The silence he'd built around himself all those years wasn't just habit. It was protection. But even as he tried to convince himself, he couldn't forget the look on William's face. The quiet disappointment that lingered long after the headlights faded. 2 days later, Isabel called him. Her voice was firm, though her tone carried no anger. "Come by," she said. "We have something that needs fixing." When B arrived, there was nothing broken. Isabel sat at the kitchen table with her glasses perched low, folding laundry. She didn't offer coffee this time. She just gestured to the chair across from her. "I heard about the diner," she said calmly. B froze. "You talked to him?" "He didn't have to tell me," she replied. "I saw it in his face when he came home." "You heard him. Even if you think you were protecting him," B looked down, his hands tightening around his cap. "It's not that simple." Isabel's eyes softened, but her words stayed sharp. "It never is, but if you came here only to fix pipes, then stop coming. Leave my son alone. He doesn't need someone." Halfway, B met her gaze, startled by her bluntness. "I didn't mean to." She raised her hand gently. "I know you didn't. That's the problem. You keep meaning well, but fear makes you cruel without realizing it." The words hit deeper than he expected. He stared at the window where sunlight slid across the floor like water. Isabel sighed and pushed a folded napkin toward him. Written on it were 3 words. "Come for dinner tomorrow," she said. 700. "I'm inviting neighbors so it won't look strange." He frowned. "Why?" She smiled faintly. "Because some walls don't fall unless others help push." Be left feeling unsettled. The next day, he debated for hours whether to go. By evening, he found himself driving back anyway, his pulse uneven with every mile. When he arrived, the front yard was quiet, no sign of guests. Only Isabel stood at the door wearing a soft floral dress. "There's no dinner party, is there?" he asked. She smiled, her eyes glinting with mischief. "Not unless you count 3 people as a party inside." The table was set for 3. William sat near the window, his posture stiff, his eyes downcast. B hesitated. At the doorway, Isabel motioned for him to sit. The meal began in silence. Plates clinked, forks scraped, but no one spoke. The tension was thick enough to taste. B kept his gaze on his food, afraid to look up. Finally, Isabel put down her fork and said quietly, "You both eat like strangers. I didn't raise my son to forget his manners." William let out a small, humorless laugh. "You invited him, not me. I invited you." "Both," she replied, "because neither of you knows how to talk." B finally looked at William. The younger man's eyes were guarded, but there was something fragile beneath the anger. Reese wanted to apologize to explain the fear that had crawled under his skin since that morning at the diner, but the words stuck. Isabel stood slowly, circling the table. She placed a hand on William's shoulder, then reached for Reese's wrist and guided his hand toward her son's. The touch was hesitant at first, their fingers brushing like a spark, testing the air. Enough running, she said softly. Both of you neither man spoke. William's eyes glistened with something fierce and uncertain. B exhaled, his heart beating too fast, too hard. He didn't pull away this time. After dinner, they helped Isabel clear the dishes. She hummed while washing, pretending not to watch them. When the kitchen lights dimmed, B turned toward William. I shouldn't have, he began. William cut him off, his voice low. You think too much about what others see. You forget what you feel. B took a step closer. I was scared, he admitted. So was I, Mateo said, but I showed up anyway. The words hung between them, bare and heavy, for a moment. Neither moved. Then quietly Mateo reached out, his fingers grazing Reese's sleeve. I don't want promises, he said. Just honesty, B nodded. Then, here's the truth. I don't know what comes next, but I don't want to keep pretending it didn't happen. William's expression softened. He looked toward the doorway where Isabel's shadow lingered, then back at B. That's a start, he said quietly. They stepped outside after cleaning up. The air was cool, filled with the scent of wet soil from a light rain earlier. The porch light flickered against the dark. Isabel stayed inside, giving them space. The quiet between them was no longer tense. It was fragile, waiting to be handled with care. I thought you'd disappear, William said after a long silence. I almost did, B admitted. Then your mother told me not to let fear decide for me. Mateo smiled faintly. She's good at that. She's better than I deserve, B replied. They stood side by side, the sound of crickets rising around them. The highway hummed faintly. In the distance, a reminder that the world kept moving. William turned slightly, his shoulder brushing Reese's. So what now? B looked at him, the corner of his mouth twitching into a small smile. Now we stop pretending we don't care for a long moment. They simply stood there breathing the same air. The night felt alive again, pulsing with quiet courage. Inside, Isabel watched through the screen door, her expression soft. She whispered a prayer or maybe a thank you. Then she turned off the porch light and left them to the stars. The silence that followed was no longer heavy. It felt like forgiveness. After that dinner, something changed, though neither of them said what it was. The air between B and Mateo no longer felt like a wall. It was still careful, still unsure, but the silence that used to divide them now carried warmth instead of distance. They didn't announce anything, not to others and not even to each other. They just began again, slowly, quietly, like two people rebuilding a house after a storm without mentioning how it fell. Reese kept his roots. William took his. Their trucks rolled down separate stretches of dirt road, but more often now those stretches met. Sometimes it was coincidence, sometimes not. They would find each other at the same feed store, at the same diner, at the same turnoff where the prairie dipped into open plains. They no longer avoided it. They shared tables, shared jokes, even shared the occasional breakfast when time allowed. The world outside stayed the same, but something in their rhythm had softened. Isabel noticed first. She didn't ask questions. Instead, she created reasons. One morning, she called B, pretending she needed help carrying boxes from the shed. When he arrived, she had already stacked them by the door. You're just in time, she said, waving him in. William was about to make lunch. Her tone left no room for refusal. Another day. She sent them both to the market under the excuse of needing groceries. They drove there in separate trucks, but returned in one. It became a quiet ritual. She would smile from her chair on the porch when they came back, pretending to fuss over the time, but always with a glint in her eye. If the world is too loud, she said once, you make your own silence. For B, those words stayed. He thought about them during long drives while the planes rolled endlessly past his windshield. The land used to feel endless, a space that stretched between him and everything he couldn't say. Now it felt smaller, almost gentle, like something that was finally giving instead of taking. He began to enjoy the small stops, the coffee and dusty cafes, the brief phone calls, the comfort of knowing someone else was driving somewhere out there on the same horizon. William changed, too. The sharp edges that used to guard him began to fade. He laughed more easily. He stopped hiding his accent when he talked to strangers. He even played music again, strumming his guitar during breaks while Reese leaned against his truck, listening in. Silence. It wasn't romantic, not in any obvious way, but there was a quiet intimacy in how easily they existed side by side. One afternoon, Bea arrived at Isabel's house to find her sitting outside with her shawl draped loosely over her shoulders. The breeze moved through her hair like thin threads of silver. She looked up and smiled. "You keep coming back," she said softly. He smiled back. "You keep finding work for me," she chuckled. "Work is only an excuse. What I wanted was company." She patted the chair beside her. "Sit, my son, tell me something good." He sat, watching the light fade over the hills. "Good," he said. "The road's quiet this week." "That's not what I meant." She tilted her head, studying him. "How's your heart, Mr. Quiet One?" He looked down, unsure how to answer. "Still learning how to move again," he said at last. She nodded as if that were enough. "That's all any of us do," she said. "We keep learning how to move." When William came home that evening, he saw them sitting together talking softly, their faces calm. He leaned against the doorway watching. There was no jealousy, only a deep, quiet gratitude that they could both exist in the same place without needing to explain anything. After that, time unfolded gently. Weeks slipped by, then months. Sometimes they didn't see each other for days, but there was always a message waiting. Somewhere in a text, in a note tucked under a coffee cup, in the simple way headlights would flash twice when one passed the other at night. It was enough. One night as Bea drove through the open country, the sky opened wide with stars. His phone buzzed softly on the seat beside him. A text from William, warm and familiar. "You still awake, old man?" Reese smiled. "Barely. Keep your eyes open," William replied. "You're missing a good moon tonight." He looked up. The moon hung large and low, turning the land into silver. "You always sound like you're sitting next to me," Bea typed quietly. "Maybe I am," came the answer, his tone playful but tender. They texted until the signal faded, the connection dissolving. Bea kept the phone open long after, as if the faint light itself was proof that he wasn't alone anymore. When he pulled into his driveway hours later, his phone buzzed. Again, picture came through. It was a photo of the moon taken from a different angle, framed by the windshield of a truck. Under it, William had written, "Still here." Bea typed back without thinking, "Copy that, partner." The word stayed glowing on the screen for a while before he set the phone down. He closed his eyes and let the silence wrap around him. It no longer felt heavy. It felt like peace. In the months that followed, their connection deepened, though they still kept it private, not hidden, just quiet. People noticed small things, a shared look, a faint smile, but nobody said much. The world around them didn't change, yet somehow it gave them room to exist. Isabel helped with that. She was the gravity holding everything steady. Sometimes she teased them both. Sometimes she pretended not to see what was obvious. Her health improved and she spent more time on the porch watching the road, her knitting resting half finished in her lap. She often said she liked the view, but Reese knew she was waiting to see those two trucks appear again on the horizon. One evening she called them inside for dinner. The house smelled of tortillas and cilantro. She made them sit together at the small kitchen table. When they finished eating, she placed her hands over theirs, one on top of the other. "You know," she said softly, "people spend whole lives trying to find something that feels this simple, Don't waste it. William lowered his eyes. We're not trying to hide. I know, she said. You're just trying to survive. But sometimes surviving means letting the light in her words lingered in the quiet. After the ticking of the old clock filled the space, steady and patient. That night, Reese stayed longer than usual. They sat outside after Isabel went to bed. The night cool, the sky wide open. William leaned against him, their shoulders touching. No one could see them out there, and even if someone could, neither of them cared anymore. I used to think I'd end up alone, B said quietly. William smiled faintly. You almost did, B chuckled. You saved me from myself. William shook his head. No, you just finally stopped running. The headlights of passing cars swept across the field, lighting them for a second before fading. They sat through the silence, breathing in rhythm. Eventually, B spoke again. Your mom, he said. She's the reason this worked. She always is, Mateo replied, even when she pretends she's not. When B left that night, Isabel was still awake. She sat on the porch with a blanket around her shoulders. She looked up as he passed and said quietly, Drive safe, my son, and don't forget to come back. He smiled. I won't. As he drove away, he caught sight of her in the mirror, small against the wide porch. Light, her hand raised in farewell. The image stayed with him for miles. Time moved forward. Seasons shifted. The plains changed colors from gold to rust, to gray, yet some things stayed constant. The hum of engines, the pulse of the back roads, the comfort of a familiar voice breaking through static. They didn't need grand gestures. They had small ones, steady ones, the kind that built a life without asking permission. One afternoon, months later, Isabel sat outside watching the horizon. She was weaker now, her breathing slower, but her eyes were bright. The sound of two engines echoed faintly in the distance. She smiled as she saw them appear side by side, like two lines of light cutting across the fading day. When the trucks passed, their headlights merged into one long beam stretching across the road. She lifted her hand toward the glow, whispering. Finally, together the words drifted into the warm air, carried by wind and dust and memory. Somewhere on that road, B glanced to his right. William met his eyes through the glass and smiled. B smiled back. The world rolled out before them, vast and open, and for once the silence wasn't something to escape. It was home. Sometimes the loudest love stories are the quiet ones, the kind that unfold between long stretches of silence and the hum of an old engine. B and Mateo never needed to declare anything to the world. They simply found a rhythm that belonged to them, one built from glances, from small kindnesses, from the courage to stay when it was easier to leave. Their story isn't about fireworks or perfect endings. It's about finding warmth in the places we thought were too cold for it, about learning that love can grow even in the solitude of open roads. It's about two men who stopped running, who chose stillness, who understood that peace is not found in noise, but in presence. Maybe you've met someone who changed how the world sounds. Maybe you've learned to listen to the quiet between heartbeats. If this story spoke to you, remember the roads. Thanks for wacting.